Some nights change a life forever, not slowly, not gradually, but in a single moment so sudden and unexpected that everything before begins to feel like a different world. For Elena Hayes, that moment began on what should have been the most ordinary night of her week. Chicago moved with its usual restless rhythm. The late afternoon traffic hummed through the streets, and people rushed along sidewalks carrying the quiet weight of their own responsibilities. Neon storefronts flickered awake as the day slowly drifted toward evening, and the city's towering buildings cast long shadows across the blocks below. To most people, it was just another weekday. To Elena Hayes, it was the end of another exhausting shift. At 25 years old, Elena had already learned that life rarely offered easy paths. She lived in a small two-bedroom apartment on the west side of the city, the kind of place where the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing through the night, and the heating system worked only when it felt like cooperating. Still, it was home, and it was all she could afford. Elena pushed open the glass door of the diner where she worked her evening shift and stepped onto the sidewalk, the smell of fried food and coffee lingering faintly on her clothes. Her dark brown hair was tied back loosely, strands falling around her face from a long day of work. Her uniform apron was folded neatly over her arm as she walked. The street lights had not turned on yet, but the sun was beginning to fade behind the skyline. She checked the time on her phone. 6:42 p.m. Her second job would start in less than 2 hours. For most people, 2 jobs sounded exhausting. For Elena, it was necessary, because every paycheck she earned had a destination: rent, groceries, medical bills, school supplies, and most importantly, her younger brother. Lucas Hayes was only 16 years old, but he had already faced more difficulty than most teenagers his age. After their father disappeared years ago and their mother passed away shortly after, Elena had become the only stable person left in his life. She worked harder than anyone Lucas knew, and she never complained about it. To Elena, responsibility was not something she talked about. It was something she lived. She walked down the sidewalk toward the bus stop, her steps steady and purposeful. The neighborhood was quieter than downtown Chicago, lined with small apartment buildings and corner stores with faded signs. Elena had walked this route hundreds of times before. It was familiar, predictable, safe, or at least it had always felt that way. Her mind drifted briefly toward Lucas. He would already be home from school by now, probably finishing homework at the kitchen table while waiting for her to return later that night. She smiled slightly at the thought. Lucas often complained about how much she worked, but Elena knew the truth. Everything she did was for him, and as long as he had a chance at a better future, every exhausting shift felt worth it. Elena crossed the street toward the bus stop. That was when she noticed a vehicle. A black SUV sat parked along the curb about 30 yards away. It looked expensive, far more expensive than most cars normally seen in this part of the neighborhood. The windows were tinted dark. Too dark. Elena slowed her pace slightly. She was not the type of person who ignored small details. Years of living in a big city had trained her to pay attention to things others might overlook. Still, a parked car by itself meant nothing. Probably someone visiting a nearby apartment. She continued walking, but a strange feeling lingered quietly in the back of her mind. Then she noticed something else. 2 men stood near the corner of the block beside a closed convenience store. They wore dark jackets despite the mild weather, and neither of them appeared to be using their phones or talking to each other. They were simply standing there, watching the street. Elena felt a small flicker of unease. It might have been nothing. Chicago was full of strangers, but instinct had always been one of Elena's strongest traits. She trusted it. Without drawing attention to herself, she subtly changed her route, walking a little farther down the sidewalk instead of heading directly toward the bus stop, just in case. The men did not move, but Elena could feel their presence behind her, that quiet sense of being observed. Her pace quickened slightly. The sun dipped lower behind the buildings. For a moment, Elena considered calling Lucas just to hear his voice. Then she decided against it. There was no reason to worry him over something that might simply be her imagination. Still, the strange SUV remained parked behind her, and the 2 men were no longer standing at the corner. They were walking, slowly, in the same direction as her. A subtle tension formed in Elena's chest. Not panic. Not yet. but the quiet alertness that appears when the mind begins preparing for danger. She turned down another street. Her footsteps quickened, and then everything happened at once. A door slammed open behind her. Heavy footsteps rushed across the pavement. Before Elena could react, a strong hand grabbed her arm. Another hand clamped over her mouth. The world exploded into chaos. Her body jerked backward as two masked men pulled her toward the black SUV parked beside the curb. Shock flooded her mind. Her instinct screamed. She struggled immediately, twisting her body, trying to break free from their grip. But the men were far stronger than she was. One of them opened the back door of the vehicle, while the other forced her inside. Elena tried to scream. The sound was muffled by the hand, covering her mouth. Her heart pounded violently as the door slammed shut beside her. The engine roared to life, and the SUV began moving before she could even process what had happened. For several seconds, her mind felt completely blank. This could not be real. This had to be a mistake. A robbery. Maybe someone confused her for someone else. She struggled again, but the man beside her tightened his grip on her wrists. "Stay still," he muttered. His voice was low, controlled, not nervous. That frightened her even more. The SUV turned sharply onto a larger road, accelerating into traffic. Elena's breathing grew faster. Her thoughts raced in every direction. Why her? She was not wealthy. She had no connections to powerful people, no enemies, no secrets, nothing that would make her a target, which meant there had to be another explanation. Maybe they wanted money. Maybe they would realize soon that she had nothing worth taking. Maybe they would let her go. The possibilities flashed through her mind desperately. But something about the men inside the vehicle told a different story. They were calm, organized, experienced. This was not random. The city blurred past a window as the SUV drove through Chicago's streets. Minutes passed, then 20, then 30. Elena stopped struggling, not because she had given up, but because she needed to think. Panic would not help her survive. Observation might. She studied the men carefully. 4 of them in total, 2 in the front seats, 2 beside her in the back, all wearing dark clothing, all silent. No one spoke. No one explained anything. Eventually, the city began to change. The crowded neighborhoods faded behind them, replaced by wider roads and larger homes surrounded by tall gates and long driveways. They were leaving the familiar parts of Chicago, heading somewhere else, somewhere important. Elena's stomach tightened. The SUV slowed as it approached a massive iron gate. A security camera turned toward the vehicle. The gates opened automatically, and the car drove inside. Elena's eyes widened. Beyond the gates stood one of the largest private mansions she had ever seen. White stone walls, tall columns, endless windows glowing with warm light, luxury cars parked along a wide circular driveway, security guards standing near the entrance. This place did not belong to ordinary people. The SUV rolled to a stop. The door beside her opened. One of the men grabbed her arm again. "Out!" Elena stepped onto the gravel driveway, her heart racing. Fear wrapped around her thoughts like a tightening rope. Where was she? Why had they brought her here? As the men led her toward the towering entrance of the mansion, she heard one of them speak quietly to another. Just 2 words. A name that made even these hardened men lower their voices. And in that moment, Elena Hayes felt a deeper kind of fear settle into her chest. Because the name she heard was known across the entire city. A name whispered in news reports. A name spoken carefully by powerful people. A name connected to power, violence, and an empire that operated in the shadows. The man beside her leaned closer and muttered the name again. Sebastian Varela. Some names carry power. Some carry fear. But in Chicago's hidden world of money, influence, and quiet violence, one name carried both. Sebastian Varela. The name alone could silence a room full of powerful people. It moved through the city like an invisible force, whispered in private conversations, mentioned cautiously in business circles, and avoided entirely by those who understood the consequences of attracting his attention. Elena Hayes had never expected to hear that name spoken so close to her, yet now she stood inside the heart of his world. The massive doors of the mansion closed behind her with a deep echo that seemed to seal her fate inside the building. The sound reverberated through the wide marble entrance hall, leaving Elena with the uncomfortable realization that the outside world suddenly felt very far away. Two men gripped her arms firmly as they guided her deeper into the mansion. The interior was breathtaking. The ceiling stretched high above them, supported by elegant columns carved from white stone. A chandelier the size of a small car hung in the center of the room, scattering warm light across the polished marble floor. Expensive paintings covered the walls, their gold frames glinting softly under the lights. Everything about the place suggested immense wealth, but it was not the beauty of the mansion that captured Elena's attention. It was the atmosphere. There was a strange tension in the air, something quiet yet unmistakable. The kind of tension that exists in places where power is absolute. As the men pushed her forward, Elena noticed the guards positioned throughout the hallways. They wore black suits and discreet earpieces, their eyes scanning every movement with sharp awareness. No one appeared relaxed. Everyone looked alert, loyal, and perhaps just a little afraid. Elena had never been inside a mansion like this before, but she could already tell this was not simply a rich man's home. This was a headquarters, a command center, a place where decisions were made that could affect people far beyond these walls. Her escort stopped in the center of a large sitting area and forced her into a chair. "Stay there," one of them said quietly. Elena did not argue. Her mind was too busy trying to understand the situation. Across the room stood a long conference table surrounded by several men in expensive suits. They looked like corporate executives, wealthy, confident, powerful in their own right. Yet something about their posture seemed different. Each of them spoke carefully, their voices low, their words measured. They were not behaving like men who control their own rooms. They were behaving like men waiting for someone else to arrive. Elena's gaze moved slowly around the room. She noticed more details now. A wall of security monitors displaying live camera feeds from outside the mansion. A pair of heavy doors that likely led to private offices. Another hallway guarded by two large men who barely blinked as people walked past. The organization was obvious. Everything inside the mansion functioned with precision. It reminded Elena of the way hospitals or military buildings operated. Every person knowing exactly where they belonged and what they were responsible for. But here, the system revolved around only one person, Sebastian Varela. Elena had heard the name before. Most people in Chicago had. But the stories about him always sounded more like rumors than facts. Some said he had grown up on the roughest streets in the city, surviving gang violence and poverty before he was even old enough to finish school. Others claimed he had built his criminal empire by outsmarting rivals far older and more experienced than he was. There were darker stories, too. Stories about enemies who disappeared overnight, about business deals that turned dangerous for anyone who betrayed him, and about the quiet influence he held over politicians, corporations, and entire neighborhoods. What made Sebastian Varela truly frightening, however, was not just his power. It was his intelligence. Unlike many criminals who relied on intimidation or chaos, Sebastian had built his empire with patience, strategy, calculation. He understood systems, money, people, and he used that understanding to turn a small underground network into one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the region. That was the man Elena had been brought to see. Her chest tightened. This situation was far worse than a robbery or a mistake. She had somehow been delivered directly into the world of someone who controlled millions of dollars and commanded absolute loyalty. And she still had no idea why. A sudden movement near the conference table pulled her attention back to the present. One of the businessmen glanced toward her briefly. His eyes lingered for only a moment before returning to the documents in front of him, but the look he gave her was filled with quiet curiosity, as if he was trying to understand how someone like Elena had ended up inside this place. She wished she knew the answer herself. Minutes passed slowly. The room remained quiet. The only sounds were distant footsteps somewhere deeper inside the mansion and the faint hum of the security monitors. Elena's thoughts began to spiral. Why would someone like Sebastian Varela want her here? She was not wealthy. She had no powerful connections. Her life was painfully ordinary. Yet the men who kidnapped her had acted with confidence, as if they were following specific instructions, which meant this was not random. Someone had chosen her. That realization sent a cold wave of fear through her chest. Because if someone like Sebastian Varela had intentionally targeted her, then whatever came next would be far more dangerous than she had imagined. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The guards near the hallway straightened slightly. The businessmen at the table stopped speaking, and every person in the room turned their attention toward the staircase at the far end of the hall. Footsteps echoed from above. Slow, measured, confident, the sound carried through the mansion with quiet authority. Elena followed the direction of everyone else's gaze. A tall figure appeared at the top of the staircase. Sebastian Varela. He descended the stairs without hurry, his movements calm and controlled. He wore a dark suit that fit perfectly, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. From a distance, he looked less like a criminal and more like the head of a powerful corporation. But there was something about him that immediately commanded attention. Perhaps it was the way the entire room reacted to his presence. The guard became more alert. The businessmen sat slightly straighter. Even the men who had kidnapped Elena stepped back a little. No one spoke. Sebastian reached the bottom of the staircase and walked slowly toward the center of the room. His eyes scanned the surroundings with quiet awareness. Nothing escaped his attention. When he reached the conference table, he paused briefly, acknowledging the men seated there with a subtle nod. Then his gaze shifted toward Elena. For the first time since entering the room, his focus settled completely on her. Elena felt her pulse quicken. This was the man whose name controlled an empire, the man whose reputation frightened powerful people across the city. And now, he was looking directly at her. Sebastian began walking toward her chair. Each step felt deliberate, purposeful. The distance between them closed slowly. Elena forced herself not to look away. Fear pressed heavily against her chest, but something inside her refused to appear weak. Sebastian stopped only a few feet in front of her. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then Sebastian's eyes met hers, and something unexpected happened. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough that those who knew him would notice immediately. His step slowed, his gaze sharpened, and suddenly, Sebastian Varela stopped walking. There are moments when time seems to hesitate, moments when the world pauses just long enough for something unexpected to rewrite the direction of a life. For everyone standing inside Sebastian Varela's mansion that evening, the pause lasted only a few seconds, but those seconds would change everything. Sebastian Varela had stopped walking. The man whose presence commanded fear across Chicago now stood perfectly still in the center of his own mansion, his dark eyes fixed entirely on the young woman sitting in front of him, Elena Hayes. The silence that followed was immediate and unsettling. The businessmen seated at the conference table noticed it first. Their quiet conversations died instantly, replaced by cautious glances toward the man who controlled their futures. The guards near the hallway exchanged subtle looks of confusion. Even the men who had kidnapped Elena shifted slightly where they stood, uncertain of what they were witnessing, because the reaction they saw from Sebastian Varela was something none of them expected. Shock, not loud or dramatic, but unmistakable. Sebastian's gaze remained locked on Elena's face, as if the sight of her had triggered something deep within his memory. His expression did not soften. It did not show weakness, but the stillness in his body suggested something had interrupted the steady control he usually maintained. Elena noticed it immediately, and the realization sent a quiet ripple of confusion through her mind. This was not the reaction she had prepared herself for. She had expected anger, cold authority, perhaps even cruelty. But instead, the most feared man in the city looked at her as if he had seen something impossible. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the room thickened. Sebastian's bodyguards watched carefully from their positions along the walls. These men had worked for him long enough to recognize the smallest changes in his behavior, and what they saw now made no sense. Sebastian Varela never hesitated. He never looked surprised. Yet here he stood, silent and unmoving. One of the guards stepped forward slightly, unsure whether something had gone wrong. "Sir," Sebastian lifted one hand, without looking away from Elena. The guard stopped immediately. No explanation, no argument. Just silent obedience. The room returned complete stillness. Elena felt her heart beating faster. Under different circumstances, being the center of attention inside a mansion filled with powerful criminals would have terrified her. But right now, something stranger was happening. Sebastian Varela was studying her, not like a man examining a prisoner, but like someone trying to solve a puzzle. His eyes moved slowly across her face, analyzing every detail. Her dark brown hair, the shape of her eyes, the faint curve of her jawline. Something about her appearance had clearly caught his attention, and Elena could see the effect it was having on him. His usual calm control was still there, but beneath it lingered a deeper focus. A search. Inside Sebastian's mind, a storm of memories stirred. For years, he had trained himself to bury the past beneath layers of discipline and calculation. His empire required it. His reputation demanded it. Emotion was weakness in his world. Yet as he stared at Elena Hayes, something long forgotten began pushing its way back into his thoughts. A face from another time, another life, a woman standing in the sunlight years ago, her expression determined yet gentle. The resemblance was not perfect, but it was enough to break through the carefully constructed walls of his memory. Sebastian felt the weight of that realization immediately. He did not show it. He never showed weakness in front of others, but the connection was impossible to ignore. His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied Elena more closely. The room remained silent. The men at the conference table sat motionless, waiting for instructions. They knew better than to interrupt moments like this. In Sebastian Varela's world, decisions were made carefully, and everyone in the room understood that whatever happened next would depend entirely on his judgment. Elena felt the tension growing with every passing second. Something about this situation was deeply wrong. She had been kidnapped and brought to this mansion as a prisoner, yet the man responsible for her capture now looked as if he was questioning the entire situation. That realization made her fear shift into something else. Curiosity and confusion. Sebastian finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was a subtle edge beneath it. Who brought her here? The question echoed quietly through the hall. One of the masked men stepped forward. We did, sir. Sebastian turned his gaze toward him. The look he gave the man was enough to make him hesitate. On whose orders? The man blinked, clearly unsure how to respond. Your instructions, sir. Sebastian's eyes hardened slightly. I asked for someone else. The tension in the room increased instantly. The men who had kidnapped Elena exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time since arriving, Elena realized something crucial. This had not gone according to plan. The man who had ordered the kidnapping was expecting someone different, and now he was trying to understand why she had been brought instead. Sebastian turned back toward Elena. His eyes studied her again, more carefully this time. You are Elena Hayes. It was not a question. Elena nodded slowly. Yes. Sebastian seemed to process the answer quietly. His bodyguards remained alert, watching his reaction closely. None of them spoke, because none of them had ever seen Sebastian Varela hesitate over something like this before. Inside his mind, the conflict deepened. The woman in front of him was not the person he had expected to see, yet the resemblance continued pulling at something buried in his memory, a past he had tried very hard to forget. For years, Sebastian had believed that chapter of his life was closed forever, but now, standing in front of Elena Hayes, he felt the unsettling possibility that it was not. He studied her posture, her expression, the determination in her eyes despite the fear she was clearly feeling. There was strength there, more than he expected. The realization made his decision even more complicated, because if he had been wrong about the person he intended to bring here, then the consequences could be serious. Not just for Elena, but for everyone in the room. The silence stretched longer. Elena felt her hands trembling slightly, but she refused to look away from him. Something strange was unfolding, and she could sense it. This man had expected someone else. Yet now he seemed unable to dismiss her so easily. The room waited. The guards waited. Even the men at the conference table watched carefully, understanding that the next word Sebastian spoke would determine what happened next. Finally, Sebastian took a slow breath. His expression returned to its usual calm control. Whatever thoughts had disturbed him moments earlier were carefully pushed aside, but his interest in Elena remained, and that alone was enough to change everything. He glanced briefly at the men standing behind her. His voice was quiet, controlled, but unmistakably authoritative. Remove the restraints. For a moment, no one moved. The order was so unexpected that several guards hesitated, unsure if they had heard correctly. Sebastian's gaze shifted toward them. That was enough. Immediately, one of the men stepped forward and began loosening the restraints around Elena's wrists. I spilled wine on the Mafia boss during his party. His next command changed my life. Some secrets refuse to stay buried. No matter how carefully they are hidden, no matter how many years pass, certain memories wait quietly beneath the surface, ready to return the moment something familiar appears. For Sebastian Varela, that moment had just arrived. The ropes had been removed from Elena Hayes' wrists, but the tension inside the mansion had not disappeared. If anything, it had grown stronger, because everyone in the room understood something unusual was happening. Sebastian Varela was studying the young woman standing before him with attention he rarely gave anyone. Elena stood quietly in the center of the room, slowly rubbing her wrists where the restraints had been. The fear that filled her chest when she first arrived had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. Now it was mixed with confusion. She had expected anger from the powerful man standing in front of her. Instead, she was receiving something far more unsettling. Interest. Sebastian's dark eyes moved carefully across her face again, analyzing every detail with quiet intensity. Her expression, the color of her eyes, the subtle shape of her cheekbones, the way she held herself despite the fear she clearly felt. Something about her presence continued to disturb the calm certainty that normally guided his decisions. Behind him, the room remained silent. His advisors and bodyguards watched the scene unfold without speaking. None of them had ever seen Sebastian hesitate like this before. For years, he had been known for making fast and precise decisions. In his world, hesitation could cost lives. Yet here he stood, completely focused on one person, Elena Hayes. Sebastian slowly walked around her, his steps measured and controlled. He circled her once, observing the details of her appearance from different angles. The resemblance was undeniable, not identical, but unmistakably similar, and it pulled at something inside his memory that he had tried very hard to forget. Years ago, long before his empire had grown to its current size, Sebastian Varela had lived a different life, a life that existed before power, before control, before his name had become something feared across the city. Back then, he had been a young man trying to survive the harsh streets of Chicago, a man who believed loyalty and ambition could carve a path out of poverty. It was during those years that he had met a woman who changed everything. Her name had been Isabella Moreno. She had not belonged to the world Sebastian eventually built. Isabella had been different from the people he surrounded himself with now. Kind, strong, and stubborn enough to challenge him when he needed it. She had believed there was still something good inside him, even when he begun stepping into darker parts of the city's underground world. For a brief time, she had been the only person capable of seeing beyond the reputation he was slowly building. But that life had ended abruptly. Isabella had disappeared from his world years ago under circumstances that still haunted him. And now, standing inside his mansion, Sebastian could not ignore the strange resemblance between Elena Hayes and the woman he once knew. The same determined eyes, the same quiet strength beneath fear. The possibility was impossible to ignore. Sebastian stopped walking and faced Elena again. "Where are you from?" he asked calmly. Elena hesitated for a moment before answering. "Chicago." Sebastian's expression did not change. "Your family." Elena felt her chest tighten slightly. "My mother passed away several years ago." "And your father?" She paused. The subject always carried a quiet pain for her. "He left when I was very young." Sebastian watched her carefully as she spoke. Every word, every expression, every hesitation. His instincts told him there was something important hidden inside her past, and instincts had guided his success for years. He turned slightly toward one of the men standing near the wall. "Bring me everything you can find about Elena Hayes." The man nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." Within seconds, he disappeared down the hallway, already moving to carry out the order. Elena stared at Sebastian in disbelief. "You're investigating me?" Sebastian did not look surprised by the question. "Correct." "Why?" For the first time since entering the room, Elena's voice carried a hint of defiance. Fear was still there, but confusion had begun pushing aside. Sebastian studied her quietly before answering. "Because I believe you may be connected to someone I once knew." Elena frowned slightly. "I don't understand." Sebastian did not explain further. Instead, he walked toward the long conference table where his advisors still sat watching the situation unfold. One of them, a tall man with gray hair named Victor Calderon, leaned forward slightly. Victor had worked with Sebastian for nearly a decade and was one of few people who could speak openly in his presence. "This situation is unusual," Victor said carefully. Sebastian glanced toward him. "Yes," Victor continued. "You specifically requested someone else to be brought here tonight." "That is correct." Victor folded his hands on the table. Then perhaps this mistake should be corrected quickly. The meaning behind the words was clear. Victor was suggesting Elena be removed from the situation entirely. But Sebastian did not respond immediately. His attention shifted back toward Elena, who stood quietly near the center of the room, still watching him, still trying to understand why she had become the focus of his attention. After a long moment, Sebastian spoke again. "This is not a mistake." Victor raised an eyebrow slightly. "You are certain?" Sebastian's voice remained calm. "I will decide that once I have more information." The room fell silent again. Elena's mind struggled to keep up with everything she had just heard. Someone from Sebastian Varella's past. A resemblance. An investigation into her identity. The situation was becoming stranger by the minute, and the more she thought about it, the more unsettling the possibility became. Because if Sebastian believed she was connected to someone from his past, then her kidnapping might not have been random at all. She felt a chill run through her chest. Was it possible someone had mistaken her for another person? Or worse, was she somehow connected to a secret she didn't even know existed? Minutes passed slowly as the room waited. The silence was broken by the sound of footsteps returning from a hallway. The man Sebastian had sent earlier entered the room again, holding a thin folder in his hand. He walked directly toward Sebastian and handed it over. "This is what we found so far." Sebastian opened the folder without speaking. The room watched as his eyes moved across the pages. Elena's heart pounded harder with every passing second. Inside that folder was her entire life, her records, her family history, every detail investigators could gather in such a short time. Sebastian turned another page, then another. Suddenly, his eyes stopped moving. His expression changed slightly, not dramatically, but enough that Victor noticed immediately. Sebastian closed the folder slowly. The room remained silent. Victor leaned forward slightly. "Did you find something?" Sebastian looked up. His gaze moved directly toward Elena, and in that moment, the calm certainty in his expression told everyone in the room something important had just been confirmed. Elena felt the weight of his stare. Her pulse quickened, because whatever Sebastian had just discovered, it had clearly changed everything. He spoke only one sentence. Quiet, measured, but powerful enough to shift the entire atmosphere of the room. "Her identity is exactly what I feared." And the truth hidden inside that file was about to connect Elena Hayes to a past Sebastian Varela had spent years trying to forget. Some decisions reveal more about a person than years of reputation ever could. Inside the mansion of Sebastian Varela, where power had always been maintained through control and ruthless precision, one unexpected decision was about to reshape the balance of everything. The file closed in Sebastian's hand with a quiet but decisive motion. The room waited. Victor Calderon and the other advisors sitting at the long table studied Sebastian's expression carefully, searching for clues about what he had just discovered inside the documents. Sebastian rarely showed emotion. His calm control was one of the many reasons people feared him. But the moment his eyes moved toward Elena Hayes again, it was clear that something significant had changed. Not anger, not hostility, something more complicated. Elena stood quietly near the center of the room, feeling the weight of every gaze around her. The silence felt heavier now, filled with questions no one had answered yet. She had never imagined that her life, her ordinary, struggling life, could somehow intersect with a man like Sebastian Varela. Yet here she was. And whatever truth existed inside, that file had clearly tied her fate to his world. Sebastian finally spoke. "Leave us." The command was simple, but it carried the kind of authority that required no explanation. The advisors at the table exchanged brief glances before standing. None of them argued. Victor remained seated for one moment longer. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly. Sebastian's gaze did not move from Elena. "Yes." Victor nodded slowly and rose from his chair. Within seconds, the men left the room, their footsteps fading down the hallway. Only the guards remained near the walls. And Elena, the enormous room suddenly felt much larger. Sebastian walked toward one of the tall windows overlooking the private courtyard outside. The fading sunlight reflected against the glass, casting long shadows across the marble floor. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he spoke without turning around. "You resemble someone I once knew." Elena felt the words settle heavily in the air. "Who?" Sebastian turned slowly to face her again. "Isabella Moreno." The name meant nothing to Elena. She shook her head slightly. "I've never heard that name before." Sebastian studied her carefully, as if measuring the honesty behind her answer. Years of experience had taught him how to recognize lies. What he saw in Elena's expression looked genuine, which made the situation even more complicated. "Isabella disappeared many years ago," Sebastian continued, "before my organization became what it is today." Elena remained silent, unsure what any of this meant for her. Sebastian walked back toward the table and placed the folder down again. "She had a younger sister," he said. Elena's chest tightened slightly. "My mother had a sister," she replied quietly. Sebastian's eyes sharpened. "What was her name?" "Elena Morales." The room fell silent again, because inside the file Sebastian had just read, the same name appeared connected to Isabella Moreno. The pieces were beginning to form a clear picture. Elena Hayes was not a random victim. She was a niece of the woman who had once been the most important person in Sebastian Varela's life. Sebastian leaned slightly against the table, considering the implications carefully. For years, Isabella's disappearance had remained one of the few mysteries he had never fully solved. He had searched for answers. He had tried to track down the people responsible, but the trail had always vanished before he could uncover the truth. Now, unexpectedly, someone connected to her past had appeared inside his mansion. Elena Hayes. But the connection carried another problem, and it was far more dangerous. Sebastian looked at her again. "You were not supposed to be brought here tonight." Elena frowned. "Then why was I kidnapped?" "Because my enemies are searching for you." The word struck her like a sudden blow. "My enemies?" she repeated. Sebastian nodded. "They believe you may know something about Isabella Moreno." Elena shook her head quickly. "I don't know anything about her." "I believe you, but they may not." Elena felt fear rising again. "Why would they think I know something?" Sebastian walked slowly toward her. "Because people who disappear often leave behind unfinished stories. And sometimes those stories lead to family." The meaning became painfully clear. Someone out there believed Elena possessed information connected to Isabella's disappearance. Information that could threaten powerful people, even if Elena herself had no idea what it was. Sebastian spoke calmly. "My organization intercepted a conversation earlier this week." Elena listened carefully. "Several men connected to one of my rival networks were discussing your name." Her heart pounded faster. "They were planning to capture you." Elena felt the room spin slightly as the reality of the situation settled into her mind. She had not been kidnapped randomly. Two powerful criminal groups had been looking for her, and she had unknowingly walked directly into the middle of their conflict. Sebastian continued. "They believe bringing you here would force answers. But now the situation has changed." Elena swallowed. "What happens now?" Sebastian's expression hardened slightly. "Now they will assume you are under my protection." The weight of those words carried a deeper meaning. Protection from Sebastian Varela did not come without consequences. Elena understood that instinctively. "Protection?" she asked cautiously. Sebastian nodded. For now. Elena stared at him. You're saying I have to stay here? Yes. The answer was immediate. Elena felt frustration pushing through her fear. You kidnapped me. And now you expect me to trust you? Sebastian did not appear offended. Trust is not necessary. Then what is survival? The word hung in the air between them. Sebastian continued calmly. If you leave this mansion tonight, my enemies will find you before morning. Elena tried to process the statement. Every instinct inside her wanted to escape this place. Yet the quiet certainty in Sebastian's voice made the danger feel very real. Inside these walls, he said, you are protected, and outside you become a target. The power imbalance in the room was impossible to ignore. Sebastian controlled everything here. The guards, the building, the information about her situation. Elena felt trapped between two terrible choices. Trust a man whose reputation terrified the entire city, or face enemies she had never even met. She lowered her gaze briefly, trying to steady her thoughts. When she looked up again, Sebastian was still watching her carefully, almost as if he was trying to understand her reaction. Why are you helping me? She asked quietly. Sebastian did not answer immediately. Then he spoke. Because Isabella once saved my life. The simple sentence carried more emotion than anything he had said so far. And protecting her family is a debt I intend to repay. Elena did not know what to say. Part of her wanted to believe him. Another part reminded her exactly who he was. A man whose empire had been built on power, intimidation, and violence. Yet somehow he was also the only person offering her protection. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. Days passed. Elena remained inside the mansion under Sebastian's protection. The experience felt surreal. She was not treated like a prisoner, but she was not free either. Guards watched the hallways constantly. Every door required security clearance. Every movement inside the mansion followed a strict structure. She began noticing the complex hierarchy within Sebastian's organization. Advisors who handle financial operations. Security teams who control the property. Visitors who arrived quietly in expensive cars, discussing matters that hinted at a vast and powerful network. Elena watched all of it carefully, and slowly, her understanding of Sebastian's world grew. But with that understanding came another realization. Protection from someone like Sebastian Varela also meant becoming part of his world. And that world was built on power, secrets, and danger. One evening, as Sebastian reviewed reports in his private office, Victor entered the room with an urgent expression. Sebastian! Sebastian looked up. What is it? Victor placed a tablet on the desk. Our surveillance teams intercepted new information. Sebastian scanned the screen quickly. His expression hardened. They found her already. Victor nodded slowly. Yes. Sebastian leaned back in his chair, his mind immediately calculating the implications. Because the message on the screen confirmed something troubling. His enemies had already begun moving, and they were coming directly for Elena Hayes. Power rarely announces itself loudly. Most of the time, it hides behind calm voices, quiet meetings, and decisions that change the lives of people who never even realized who made them. Inside Sebastian Varela's mansion, Elena Hayes slowly began to understand that truth. The first few days after learning that powerful enemies were searching for her felt unreal. She moved through the mansion like someone walking through a dream, aware that every detail around her represented a world far removed from the life she had known. Outside those walls, she had been an ordinary young woman trying to survive in Chicago. Inside them, she had become part of something far larger, something far more dangerous. The mansion itself was not simply a residence. It functioned as the center of an empire. Elena began to notice this as she quietly observed the activity around her. Expensive vehicles arrived at the front gate throughout the day. Men and women dressed in elegant suits walked through the marble hallways, carrying folders and digital tablets. Some spoke different languages. Others arrived with bodyguards of their own. None of them looked surprised to be inside Sebastian Varela's home. The building operated like the headquarters of a powerful corporation, except Elena quickly realized that the business conducted here extended far beyond legal markets. and the man controlling it all remained the same calm, calculating figure she had first seen descending the staircase, Sebastian Varela. Every time he entered a room, conversations changed. People stood a little straighter, voices lowered. Even powerful guests who appeared confident moments earlier became more cautious in his presence. It was not loud intimidation that commanded their respect. It was control. Elena noticed how carefully he listened during meetings. He rarely spoke first. Instead, he allowed others to present information, watching them closely as they explained their proposals or concerns. Then, when he finally did speak, his decisions were direct and precise. She witnessed one such meeting from a balcony overlooking the main hall one afternoon. Several men representing an international shipping company had arrived to discuss an agreement involving cargo routes along the East Coast. Their tone suggested they believed themselves to be powerful negotiators. But as the conversation unfolded, it became clear that Sebastian had already anticipated every argument they planned to make. He asked simple questions that forced them to reveal more information than they intended. Within minutes, the entire negotiation shifted. By the end of the meeting, the visitors left the mansion agreeing to terms that clearly favored Sebastian's organization. Elena watched the scene quietly, realizing something important. Sebastian did not rely on violence to maintain power. Violence was only the final option. His true strength came from understanding people, and using that understanding to control situations before conflict even began. But not every situation ended peacefully. Several days later, Elena witnessed a different side of Sebastian's leadership. Late one evening, tension spread to the mansion when a group of security officers escorted a man into the private conference room. The man looked terrified. His hands trembled as he tried to explain something to the guards standing beside him. Elena stood near the hallway entrance, observing quietly as Sebastian entered the room. The atmosphere changed immediately. The guard stepped aside. The man lowered his eyes, unable to meet Sebastian's gaze. Though Elena could not hear every word spoken inside the room, she understood enough to grasp the situation. The man had betrayed one of Sebastian's operations. He had shared confidential information with an outside organization in exchange for money. The consequences were swift. Sebastian did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply listened to the man's explanation until it ended. Then he spoke calmly. The decision he delivered was quiet, but the result was unmistakable. The man was removed from the mansion within minutes, and he was never seen again. Elena felt a chill move through her chest as she realized the meaning behind that moment. Sebastian Varela ruled his empire through loyalty, and betrayal was something he never tolerated. The realization forced Elena to confront the true nature of the world she had been pulled into. From the outside, the mansion looked glamorous. Expensive cars, luxury furnishings, influential visitors arriving every day. But beneath that polished surface existed a system built on something much darker: fear, respect, and absolute control. Elena struggled with the contradiction. Sebastian had offered her protection. He had explained the danger she faced from his enemies. Yet she could not ignore the truth she now witnessed daily. This was a criminal empire, and the man protecting her was also the man who commanded it. Despite that reality, Elena could not deny something else she had begun noticing. Sebastian's behavior toward her remained different from how he treated others. He never raised his voice when speaking with her. He never issued orders directed at her personally. Instead, he seemed to observe her quietly whenever their paths crossed inside the mansion, as if he were still trying to understand the strained connection between her and the past he rarely spoke about. Days turned into weeks, and Elena gradually adapted to life inside the mansion. She learned which areas were restricted, which guards handled different sections of security, which advisors frequently visited Sebastian's private office. The more she observed, the clearer the structure of the organization became. Victor Calderon managed financial networks. Another advisor oversaw international operations. Security teams rotated shifts every 8 hours. Everything inside the empire followed precise coordination. Yet despite this careful system, danger continued to surround them. Elena overheard fragments of conversations between guards discussing rival organizations moving through the city. Several times she noticed security vehicles patrolling the perimeter of the estate more aggressively than usual. The threat Sebastian had mentioned earlier remained real. His enemies were watching, waiting, looking for any opportunity to reach the woman they believed possessed important information. One evening, unable to sleep, Elena wandered quietly through one of the mansion's upper corridors. The house was mostly silent at that hour. Soft lighting illuminated the hallway walls. Security cameras turned slowly as they monitored the area. Elena paused near a door she had never noticed before. It stood slightly open. Inside the room, a single desk lamp cast light across a large wooden table. Curiosity pulled her closer. She stepped inside cautiously. The room appeared to be a private study. Bookshelves lined the walls. Documents were stacked neatly across the desk. But what caught Elena's attention immediately was the large board mounted against the far wall. It was covered with photographs, maps, and handwritten notes connected by red strings. Elena moved closer, her eyes scanning the information displayed there. Several photographs showed powerful political figures. Others displayed members of criminal organizations. Each image was connected by a complex web of lines and notes. At the center of the board was a single photograph Elena recognized immediately. Her own face stared back at her. Beneath it was another photograph, a woman Elena had never seen before. Yet the resemblance between them was impossible to ignore. Isabella Moreno. The name was written below the image in bold letters. Elena's pulse quickened, because suddenly she understood something terrifying. Sebastian had not simply been protecting her. He had been studying her, trying to uncover secrets connected to a past that clearly still haunted him. As Elena stepped closer to the board, examining connections between the photographs and documents, she heard a quiet sound behind her, the soft creak of the study door opening wider. Her body froze instantly, because she already knew who stood in the doorway. Sebastian Varela had returned to the room, and he had just discovered that Elena Hayes had uncovered one of the most carefully guarded secrets inside his empire. Trust, in most people's lives, is something given slowly. In Sebastian Varela's world, it was something that had to be earned through risk, because power did not survive long in the presence of uncertainty. And anyone who entered that world eventually faced a single, unavoidable question. Could they be trusted when everything was at stake? Elena Hayes realized that question had finally arrived. The quiet study inside the mansion felt suddenly smaller as Sebastian Varela stepped through the doorway. The soft light from the desk lamp cast long shadows across the walls, illuminating the investigation board Elena had just been examining. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. Elena stood beside the board, her eyes still lingering on the photographs and documents connected by thin red strings. Her own photograph remained pinned near the center, beside the image of Isabella Moreno. Sebastian closed the door behind him. The sound echoed quietly through the room. He did not appear surprised to find her there, but his expression carried a deeper intensity now, the kind that suggested he'd been expecting this moment eventually. Elena felt her pulse quicken. She had discovered something she clearly was never meant to see. And in Sebastian's world, secrets carried consequences. Sebastian walked slowly toward the board, his gaze briefly scanning the information displayed across it. He reached out and adjusted one of the red strings connecting two photographs. Only then did he speak. "You're observant." The statement was calm, not angry, but Elena understood the meaning behind it. "I wasn't looking for it," she said carefully. Sebastian turned his attention toward her. "But you found it." Elena remained silent. Sebastian studied her face closely, searching for something deeper than simple curiosity. Fear, deception, intent. For years, he had built his empire by learning to read people quickly and accurately. One wrong judgment could destroy everything. So he watched Elena carefully, analyzing her reaction to the secret she had uncovered. "What do you think you discovered?" he asked. Elena hesitated. Then she answered honestly. "You've been investigating me." Sebastian nodded slightly. "Yes." "And Isabella Moreno." "Yes." Elena looked back at the photograph pinned to the board. "You still don't know what happened to her." Sebastian's expression hardened slightly. That is correct. The room grew quiet again. Elena could feel the tension between them building, because the truth was unavoidable now. She had stepped too close to something dangerous. Sebastian moved closer to the board and removed Elena's photograph from its position. He held it between his fingers, studying it briefly before placing it on the desk beside him. "You understand what kind of world you're standing inside," he said. Elena nodded slowly. "Yes. And you understand what happens when someone learns information they were not meant to see." The words carried no threat, but the implication was clear. Elena took a breath before answering. "I didn't tell anyone." Sebastian's eyes remained steady. That would have been unwise. For a moment, the silence between them felt heavier than before. Then Sebastian stepped away from the board and leaned lightly against the desk. "You remind me of Isabella," he said. The comment caught Elena off guard. "How?" "Curiosity." Elena frowned slightly. "That's not always a bad thing." "In my world," Sebastian replied, "it can be very dangerous." He paused, observing her reaction. "And yet you're still standing here." Elena met his gaze. "Because you haven't told your guard to remove me." Sebastian allowed the faintest hint of a smile. No, the conversation had shifted into something deeper now, not simply a confrontation, an evaluation. Sebastian folded his arms slowly. "You've been living inside my mansion for several weeks." Elena nodded. "You've observed my operations." "Yes." "You've seen the people who come and go." "Yes." Sebastian tilted his head slightly. "And now you've discovered the investigation I've been conducting." Elena did not deny it. "That's true." Sebastian's voice lowered slightly. "So the question becomes simple." Elena waited. "Can you be trusted?" The weight of the question settled heavily in the room. Elena felt the tension rise in her chest, because she understood the deeper meaning behind those words. Sebastian Varela was not asking a casual question. He was deciding whether she remained under his protection, or whether she had become a liability. And in his world, liabilities did not survive long. Elena answered carefully, "I haven't betrayed you." Sebastian studied her quietly. "Not yet." The words hung in the air. Elena realized something important. This conversation was not just about the secret she had discovered. It was about whether she belonged inside this world at all. Sebastian moved toward the window, staring out into the dark courtyard beyond the mansion walls. "My enemies believe you possess information connected to Isabella Moreno." Elena remained still. "I've told you I don't." "I know." He turned back toward her. "But belief is often stronger than truth." Elena understood the implication. As long as those enemies believed she held valuable information, they would continue searching for her, and that made her dangerous to protect. Sebastian walked back toward the desk. "There is only one way to resolve the situation." Elena felt a chill move through her chest. "What do you mean?" Sebastian placed both hands on the desk. "A test." Elena stared at him. "A test of what?" "Loyalty." The word felt heavier than anything he had said before. Sebastian continued. "Tomorrow evening one of my rivals will be meeting with a broker who handles sensitive information." Elena listened carefully. "That broker has access to records connected to Isabella Moreno." Her pulse quickened. "You wanted to find out what they know." Sebastian nodded once. "Yes." Elena frowned slightly. "Why me?" "Because they are looking for you." The logic was simple and terrifying. "If you appear in that meeting," Sebastian said calmly, "they will believe you are trying to recover information about Isabella, and that will make them talk." Elena realized what he was asking. "You want me to walk into a meeting with your enemies?" "Yes." The room fell silent again. Elena felt the weight of the decision pressing against her mind. If she refused, Sebastian might decide she could not be trusted. If she accepted, she would be placing herself directly in front of dangerous people who already wanted to capture her. The situation forced a painful conflict between survival and morality. Elena looked at him carefully. "You're watching how I respond." Sebastian did not deny it. "Yes." Elena felt a quiet realization forming. Everything since the night she arrived had been leading toward this moment. The protection, the investigation, even the secrets she had uncovered. It had all been part of Sebastian's evaluation. She was not just being protected, she was being tested. Elena took a slow breath. And if I refuse? Sebastian's voice remained calm. Then I will know you cannot survive in this world. The honesty of the answer left no room for misunderstanding. Elena looked toward the investigation board again. The photograph of Isabella Moreno, the tangled network of secrets surrounding her disappearance, and the strange connection that had pulled Elena into this dangerous situation. She turned back toward Sebastian. You said earlier that protecting me was a debt. Sebastian nodded. That is correct. Elena studied him carefully. Then why does it feel like I was brought here for another reason? Sebastian remained silent for a moment. Then he walked toward the board and removed Isabella Moreno's photograph from its place. He held it up briefly, allowing Elena to see it clearly. There is another reason. Elena waited. Sebastian's voice grew quieter, more serious. The night you were brought here was not an accident. Elena felt her chest tighten. What do you mean? Sebastian placed the photograph down beside Elena's file. Then he looked directly into her eyes. For years I searched for anyone connected to Isabella Moreno. The room felt suddenly still. And eventually, he continued, my investigation led me to you. Elena's breath caught, because the truth behind her kidnapping was about to change everything she believed about that night. Sebastian spoke one final sentence. Quiet, precise, and powerful enough to rewrite the entire story. You weren't kidnapped by mistake. You were brought here because I needed to find you. Some truths do not simply answer questions. They destroy the illusions people have lived with for years. For Elena Hayes, the truth behind her kidnapping was about to dismantle everything she thought she understood about her past, her family, and the dangerous world she had been pulled into. Sebastian Varella's words still lingered in the quiet study. You weren't kidnapped by mistake. You were brought here because I needed to find you. The statement changed the entire meaning of everything that had happened. Elena stood silently for several seconds, her mind struggling to process the weight of those words. The investigation board behind her suddenly felt less like a mystery and more like a map of a story that had been unfolding long before she ever realized it. You planned this, she said quietly. Sebastian did not deny it. Yes. Elena's heart pounded harder. For how long? Sebastian walked slowly toward the desk and opened a file containing the documents about her family history. The pages inside represented years of investigation, pieced together through hidden records, financial trails, and quiet surveillance. For nearly 3 years, he replied. The room felt suddenly colder. Elena had spent those same years living an ordinary life, working exhausting hours, paying bills, caring for her younger brother, believing that her family's past was simply another painful story of abandonment and loss. But Sebastian's investigation suggested something entirely different. He placed several documents on the desk between them. These records belonged to Isabella Moreno. Elena glanced at the papers carefully. Dates, addresses, bank transactions, everything connected to a woman whose face looked strikingly similar to her own. She was my mother's sister, Elena said slowly. Sebastian nodded. Yes. Elena looked up again, but she disappeared long before I was old enough to remember anything about her. Sebastian leaned against the desk. Because someone wanted her to disappear. The sentence carried a weight that made Elena's stomach tighten. What do you mean? Sebastian took a slow breath. Years ago, before his empire had become what it was today, he had been involved in a different kind of operation, one that required alliances with powerful people outside the criminal world. Politicians, financial institutions, private security contractors. These alliances had allowed him to build the foundation of the network he now controlled. But not everyone involved in those arrangements had shared the same goals. Some of them had used Sebastian's expanding organization for their own purposes. And when Isabella Moreno discovered what those alliances were truly planning, everything changed. She found evidence, Sebastian explained, evidence of financial corruption tied to several powerful figures. Elena listened carefully. She intended to expose them. Sebastian nodded. Yes, but she never got the chance. The betrayal that followed had shaped the future of Sebastian's entire empire. One of the people he had trusted most had revealed Isabella's investigation to the very men she intended to expose. Within days, she disappeared. No witnesses, no official records, no explanation, only silence. For years, Sebastian believed she had been killed, but the deeper he searched for answers, the more complicated the story became. There were financial transactions suggesting someone had helped Isabella escape. There were hidden communications indicating she had attempted to protect something before vanishing. And, eventually, those clues led to one final possibility. Isabella had hidden the most important piece of evidence before she disappeared. Elena. The realization struck Elena slowly. You think my mother knew something. Sebastian's eyes remained steady. I know she did. According to documents in front of them, Elena's mother had quietly changed her family name several years before Elena was born. She had moved frequently. She avoided maintaining consistent employment records. All signs of someone attempting to disappear from a dangerous past. She spent her life protecting you, Sebastian said. Elena felt a quiet ache rise in her chest. Her mother had always been careful, private, sometimes even paranoid about strangers asking questions about their family history. But Elena had never understood why. Now the reason was finally becoming clear. If Isabella hid the evidence, Elena said slowly, then someone believed I might know where it is. Sebastian nodded. Yes, and those men are still searching for it. Elena looked toward the investigation board again. The web of connections between powerful figures, financial records, and criminal organizations suddenly felt far more personal. The danger surrounding her was not random. It was a result of secrets buried deep within her own family history. Sebastian watched her carefully. You understand now why I had to find you first. Elena nodded slowly. You weren't protecting me out of kindness. No. Then why? Sebastian's voice lowered slightly. Because Isabella saved my life once. The confession carried a quiet weight. Without her, he continued, none of this would exist. His empire, his power, everything he had built, and the debt he still felt toward the woman who had once believed in him. Protecting Elena had never been simply about strategy. It was about finishing something that began years earlier. Elena looked down at the documents again. So what happens now? Sebastian remained silent for a moment. Then he answered honestly. That depends on you. Elena raised her eyes. You have information that powerful people want to recover or destroy, Sebastian said. If you walk away from this mansion and return to your old life, they will continue searching. Elena understood the truth behind his words. Her life could never return to what it had been before. The moment she had been pulled into this world, the past she never knew existed had become part of her future. Sebastian stepped away from the desk. You now have two choices. Elena listened carefully. You can leave here and attempt to disappear again. He paused. Or you can stay and help finish what Isabella started. The decision felt overwhelming. For most of her life, Elena had simply been trying to survive, pay rent, protect her brother, build a stable future out of very limited opportunities. But now she stood inside the center of a conflict involving powerful enemies, hidden corruption, and a past that refused to remain buried. Her future no longer belonged to the simple life she once knew. It belonged to a far more dangerous world. Elena walked slowly toward the investigation board again. Her photograph still hung beside Isabella's. Two women connected by secrets neither of them had fully understood. Finally, Elena turned back toward Sebastian. Her voice was calm. I won't run. Sebastian studied her expression carefully. You're certain? Yes. The decision surprised even her. But something inside Elena had changed during the weeks she spent inside the mansion. She had seen the truth about power, about corruption, about the systems that allowed dangerous people to operate without consequence. And she realized something important. Running would only delay the inevitable, but facing the truth might finally end it. Sebastian nodded slowly. Then we begin. Months passed after that conversation. The search for Isabella's hidden evidence continued across cities, financial networks, and encrypted records. Elena became something very different from the woman who had once worked two exhausting jobs just to survive. She learned to analyze information, to recognize manipulation, to navigate the dangerous balance between power and secrecy. And slowly, the quiet determination she had always carried inside her began shaping her into someone capable of standing inside Sebastian's world. One evening, months later, Elena stood at the front gate of the mansion. The city lights shimmered in the distance. The night air carried a quiet calm. Behind her, the massive estate that had once felt like a prison now looked very different. It had become the place where her past finally revealed its truth. Sebastian stood several steps away, watching silently as she prepared to leave for the next phase of the investigation. Elena looked back at the mansion one last time. Her mind drifted to the night everything began. The black SUV, the masked men, the fear she felt when she believed her life was about to end. At the time, she thought the kidnapping was the worst moment of her life. But now she understood something completely different. That night had not destroyed her future. It had revealed it. As Elena Hayes walked away from the mansion gates and into the uncertain path ahead, one truth became impossible to ignore. The night she was kidnapped was never the end of her story. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous.